Hi everybody, this is WR Jockey, and the topic today is why the 500X is a great beginner's bike. Now, if you are familiar with my channel or you've looked at it at all, you may know that I've already done a video on this topic. It was only a minute long. This right here is going to be the detailed version of that video. Now, before I get into that, I should tell you a little bit about my own riding experience, I think, because after all, if I just started riding last year, why should you care about anything I have to say, right? Because I don't have that much riding experience myself, if that were the case. But in fact, I began riding when I was 14 years old. I started off on dirt bikes, and started off with a Honda XR75, if you can believe that, in the mid-70s. That's a tiny little bike. And I rode dirt bikes for at least 5 years. Then I got into some street riding with dual purpose bikes. Eventually I got a street bike some years later. So all told, this 500X that I just got, this is now my 7th motorcycle that I've owned in my life. Okay, started off with the Honda XR75, that's number one. Number two was a Yamaha DT175 enduro bike that I rode strictly off-road. That thing went everywhere. It was a great bike, I loved it. Third bike was a Suzuki DR7 370 dirt bike, 370. Number four was a Honda XL500 that I got, I think, in 1982 or 83. Love that bike too. Let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And number five was a Yamaha Seika 2600 that I got in around 1992. 6 was this Yamaha WR250R that you see right there. And then this one's number 7. So all told, I have, let's see, I originally had about, started off when I was 14, rode till I was about 25. That's 11 years. Then later on in my 20s, I had a couple more years of riding experience on the street. So that's 13 years, and then I started riding again last year after a long layoff. So, about 13, 14 years of riding experience here. And I will say something that may be controversial here. While the 500X, I think, is a great beginner bike, the best beginner bike, hands down in my opinion, is a dirt bike, or possibly even a dual sport bike. And I'll explain why I say that later on in this video. For those of you who want to hear it, I'll put a link to that in the description below the video. Please read the description. I'll put some comments down there. But first, I want to talk about why I think the 500X is a great beginner bike. So when I think of what makes a great beginner bike, there are two main things to consider. And by the way, when I speak of the 500X, I'm talking about its utility as a street bike. Okay, I know some people use it off-road. I'm not going to get into that here. I made a separate video about its utility as an adventure bike. You can look at that video if you'd like to. But what I'm discussing here today, I'm talking only about its use on the street. And that's actually why I bought mine, just for street bike use. So with a beginner looking for a street bike, I think there are two really big considerations that you should think about before you buy a bike. One is the power that the bike has. There are two aspects to that: the total amount of power, horsepower, that the bike has, as well as how that power is delivered. Okay, so those are both important. This bike has 47 horsepower approximately, and it makes just under 32 pound-feet of torque. Now, I think that's appropriate for a beginner. I think it's a good level of power for a beginner. It's not too overwhelming, especially considering how the power is delivered on this machine. And I've heard some people say, or I've read online some guys say, oh, I started off on a Z900 or on a 1000. Personally, I think that's crazy. If you've never ridden a motorcycle before, I think you're asking for trouble if you do that. Even a 650 I think is too much, unless possibly it has different riding modes, electronic riding modes that you can set. And if you can set a riding mode that greatly reduces the power of that bike, then maybe a 650 would actually work for you. Now, people are going to say the same thing about a Z900. In fact, they do say that. I saw that the other day. Oh, you could set the Z900 to rain mode and it reduces its horsepower by 40%. Well, guess what? The Z900 has about something like 125 horsepower. So even if you reduce it by 40%, you're still talking, what, 70, 75 horsepower. That's a hell of a lot of horsepower. Unnecessary for a beginner and actually too much, in my opinion. Of course, this whole video is my opinion, so you're free to disagree with anything I say. I'm just giving you my opinion as an experienced rider, trying to help out beginners. That's all I'm trying to do here. So, back to the level of power. I think the level of power is good on this bike, but maybe even more importantly is how the power is delivered. I think it was Cycle World that did a video on this machine here, and it's on YouTube. You can search for it. They put this bike on the dyno to check its horsepower and torque. And I saw the graph that they came up with from the results of that dyno test, and the torque curve, if you want to call it that, around 2,000 to 2,500 RPM, it goes more or less straight up, and then it's flat the entire way, the rest of the way across the rev range from there. So what that means is you're going to get your torque starting at a very low RPM on this bike, and it's going to be a smooth linear delivery from then on throughout the rest of the rev range. And this bike is actually very easy to ride slowly at low revs if you want to. You can take it very conservatively on this bike, ride it very easily, and that's why I think it's so good for beginners, because you can ride it that way if you have some throttle control, and it's, you know, perfect for beginners in my opinion, because they're not going to want to ride fast or rev it highly, at least in the beginning. So for those reasons, I think the power delivery on this bike is fantastic, and it's smooth and controllable, and it doesn't have too much power for a beginner to handle. So the second area to consider that I think is very important when a beginner is looking at a new bike is the overall dimensions, the size of the bike. Not even so much the weight, but the size, the physical size of the bike and the dimensions. Does it fit your body frame? Okay, that's one thing. Second thing is, how well can you plant your feet on the ground? And I'll explain why that's important in a second. I think this 500X has relatively large dimensions for a 500cc bike. It is, I saw a Z650 in a shop the other day, and it looked quite small to me actually for a 650. If I didn't know better, I would have thought it was a 400, but it was a 650. And this bike, this 500X, is relatively large for a mid-engine displacement motorcycle. It's a pretty large bike, I think. So you really need to sit on it, take a test ride if that's available, but definitely sit on the bike before you get it. See how easy it is for you to reach the handlebars and how easily you can put your feet on the ground. And this bike has a 32.8-inch seat height. Now, I call that sort of a middle range height for a seat. I think a short seat height would be something in the 28 to 30 inch range. Mid-range is probably 30 to 33 inch seat height, and above 33 inches you're getting into a high seat height, which we'll talk about the WR later, but that has a very high seat height. Why is a seat height important on a motorcycle? Well, what's important is how well you can plant your feet on the ground. And why is that important? Number one, if you can put most of your feet, or at least most of one foot on the ground when you're sitting on the bike, it's going to give you added confidence. That's important, but it's also going to give you added control of the machine when you're at a stop or when you're using the bike at low speeds, which, you know, if you're a beginner, you're riding the bike, say turning it at low speeds, you may have to put your feet down from time to time, and you want to make sure you can reach the ground easily and comfortably. If you can't do that, then I wouldn't recommend this bike to you. So I think it's that important, really. And I'll give you an example of what can happen. This WR250 that I have, I was sitting on it in the driveway last summer and had my left foot on the ground. The kickstand was up, and you know, I was slightly leaning to the left with my left foot on the ground. And I don't know, I did something, I shifted my weight for some reason, and the bike moved to the other side. So I went to put my right foot down on the ground, Lo and behold, the bike was sitting over an uneven patch of ground on my driveway, and it's so tall that when I went to put my foot down, my right foot down, there was nothing underneath my foot except air. I just simply fell over. I felt like an idiot, but that's what happened. So that kind of thing can happen pretty easily. So I strongly recommend considering seat height when you check out a new bike. Another area I would consider is, this is less important, I think, is handling. The handling of the bike, the handling of this bike is really pretty good. I think it does what you want it to do. And even at 439 pounds wet weight, it feels very nimble even at lower speeds. But handling is not something I'd be too concerned with, because pretty much any modern bike is going to handle well, I think. I mean, well enough, for your purposes. If you get into highly technical riding or something, it may be a different story. But for a beginner, I think pretty much any bike is going to handle as well as you need it to, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Will this bike, the 500X, do everything you want it to do for a while as a beginner? I think the answer is yes. So I live in a small town of about 20,000 people, and it's perfect for riding in a town like that. There are a lot of country roads nearby, and it's perfect for that type of riding. If you want to use it as a daily commuter, I think that's great. It's good for the highway as well. The only thing I would think this bike would not be super fantastic for is if you want to do, say, a lot of long distance touring on it. Now, even with one person, that might be okay. But if you're looking at carrying a passenger doing that, you may want a larger machine, a larger engine. But of course, as a beginner, I don't think you're going to be doing that type of riding, at least not right away. I think this bike right here would give you what you need for at least 2 to 3 years. And then if you do want to do long distance adventure touring or something, you may want to look at a different bike at that time. But to start out on the street, I think this 500X is absolutely a perfect bike. So it's going to give you the capability you need as a beginner. And hey, with the experience I have, I bought this bike new just earlier this month. It gives me what I want at my age. I'm in my upper 50s now, and I don't need a rocket ship. I'm not looking to go super fast. And so it gives me even what I want as an experienced rider. And it can even do light off-road riding. Again, that falls under the adventure bike realm, which, a lot of people have made videos about that. If you upgrade the tires on this bike to something more suited for off-road, that could possibly work for you if you want to do like easy off-road trails, dirt roads, that sort of thing. But so that's why I think this bike is really great for beginners. However, while it is an excellent beginner bike, in my opinion, as I alluded to earlier, I think something is an even better option for a beginner. If you're brand new to motorcycles, you're just learning to ride, I think the absolute best way to do that is on a dirt bike, hands down. That's how I learned. And why do I say that? One big reason is you don't have to worry about traffic at all. If you're entirely off-road, you can focus on learning how to shift, learning how to handle the bike. And by the way, riding off-road, you will learn handling skills that you may never learn on the street only. Off-road riding teaches you tremendous handling skills because you have to learn them through experience. Otherwise, you're going to be crashing an awful lot. So I would definitely think about dirt bikes if that's an option for you. Now, I realize that for most people, or many people at least, dirt bikes won't be an option because, you don't have an off-road area to ride. I understand that. So if that's not an option for you, then what I would suggest is that you consider a dual sport bike as well as your first bike. Dual sport bikes, I'm not saying you should consider this WR because it has a really high seat height, like of over 36 inches, about 36.6 or something like that. Not exactly what I would recommend for a beginner as far as height and dimensions of the bike. But I would definitely consider a dual sport bike if I were you, because they are so light and so nimble and so flickable. The weight is simply incredible. This Yamaha right here, this 250, weighs about 295 pounds wet weight compared to the 500X at 439 pounds. Quite a big difference in weight, and it's noticeable when you're riding the bike, I'll tell you that. That's why if you have the chance, I would highly suggest as a beginner that you test ride a dual sport bike, something like the Honda 300, the Kawasaki 300, something along those lines. Again, see how the bike fits you, but I'm telling you, those bikes are so much fun to ride. Just last week, I rode my 500X for a while, brought it home, got out my Yamaha, and I had not ridden this WR since last year. And I'm telling you, I had so much fun on the WR. I forgot just how much fun it is because of its lightweight, its flickable nature. It's just a blast to ride. I mean, and this, you know, a dual sport bike like the WR or the Honda or Kawasaki 300s will do darn near anything you want to do as a beginning motorcyclist, to be honest with you. You know, again, it can be a good commuting bike, a fun weekend bike. The only thing those bikes might not be great for is like highway riding, a lot of highway riding. They can do highways, but just they won't be as comfortable for extended periods, and they don't have quite enough power for like passing or overtaking other vehicles at a good speed. So if you're going to do a lot of highway riding, you know, you could consider maybe a bigger dual sport bike like a 600 or something, or 500. But if your riding will be limited to, say, you know, small towns, back roads, that sort of thing, definitely consider one of the smaller dual sport bikes. You may be pleasantly surprised when you ride one. So I think that's about all I wanted to say in this video. It turned out to be a long one, and I apologize for that. But I hope I've given you some things to think about, some good information. If you have any questions for me about the 500X or about the WR250, feel free to leave your question in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer them. And please subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to making more videos for you, more onboard riding videos, as well as videos like this where I talk about different things. So hope this was useful to you. Thanks, and have a great day.